Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 176, Amy Bock. Part 3. So after her release, she remained in Dunedin, and then she later moved to Hilltop near Akaroa, where she worked as a governess before receiving a concurrent 6-month sentence for larceny and false pretences in Christchurch in April 1889. At the end of that year, she returned to Dunedin, where she found a job as a housekeeper, but she pawned her employer's furniture. She absconded from Dunedin in the early May and was arrested in Geraldine on the 17th of May 1890. She was unrepresented in court and did not deny charges of obtaining money by false pretences and forging a promissory note. The prosecutor described the fraud as the most cunning scheme that's ever been adopted in the colony. On the basis of her previous record, the court sentenced her to the maximum sentence of 3 years with hard labour. So an article related to this says, Amy Bock again in trouble. Dunedin. Amy Bock, alias Ida Bennett, alias Lang, whose history is not unknown to the police authorities, consequent to her appearance some 2 years ago as a kleptomaniac, was committed to trial today for obtaining £22 by false pretences from a moneylender. The accused admitted her guilt. After serving 2 years and 4 months of her sentence, she got time off for good behaviour and emerged from prison with £1.09 in her pocket and a plan to settle at Timaru. Almost immediately, she presented herself as a wealthy tourist and obtained a loan of £1 from a local school principal claiming to have lost her pocketbook. After disappearing with the money, she was quickly caught and sentenced to a term of 1 month's imprisonment. She claimed that she'd been disturbed by the news of her father's death, but he was in fact still alive and had just recently moved to Melbourne. After her release in November 1890, she first made contact with the Timaru branch of the Salvation Army and lived with army members. And there was a recollection in 1909 with an article titled The Salvation Army Incident. A report recently received publicity to the effect that Amy Bock, about 12 years ago, was a member of the Oamaru Salvation Army Corps. Mr. W. Lee Martin, who at the time was a captain of the Salvation Army stationed at Oamaru, denies this report. He states the true facts are that Amy Bock went up to the penitent form but was denied membership because her past was known and was desired to test her sincerity. Mr. Martin states that the last incident of Amy Bock's career in Oamaru, where she obtained 30 shillings from members of the Corps by representing that she'd lost that sum, the amount held by her is the proceeds of the sale of certain tickets for a soiree. Mr. Martin heard of this, and as Miss Bock had received no tickets for sale, he taxed her with obtaining money by false pretences. She stoutly denied the accusation and asked to be faced by the young men who'd informed on her. Mr. Martin went to get them, but when he returned, Amy Bock had gone, and with her the money. By Easter 1893, she was in trouble for selling her landlady's watch. Amy Bock, a young woman with a number of aliases, was charged with stealing a silver lever watch valued at £3 from the property of T. Shaw of Sandytown on or about the 29th of March. The accused preferred to be dealt with summarily and pleaded guilty. Sergeant Major MacDonald stated the case. In January last, Mrs. Shaw, who keeps a store in Sandytown, took the prisoner to live with her. She stayed 10 or 11 weeks and left on Good Friday. Shortly after she left, she sold the watch to one pal and gave a receipt for their money. She had full access to the house at Mrs. Shaw's, whence the watch was stolen. Mrs. Shaw identified the watch as her husband's and gave evidence which was inaudible except to the bench, and Powell proved that he purchased the watch from the accused for 25 shillings. Detective Livingstone stated that the accused was discharged from jail last November and was taken in by charitable people. She was taken by one lady into her house and abused her charity, and then Mrs. Shaw took her, and staying there after some weeks, she left and went to live with another person. When he arrested her on the present charge, she denied having sold the watch, but that morning admitted it and said she would plead guilty. The bench referred to the prisoner's record that included 5 sentences, one of 3 years servitude and 4 shorter ones, a sentence of 3 years for forgery, and addressing the prisoner said that she had a bad record, and the prisoner said, "Yes, your worship," and the case was the worst as she had abused the kindness of Mrs. Shaw. They considered they would be dealing leniently with her in giving her 6 months imprisonment with hard labour. The watch was ordered to be returned to the owner. After serving her 6-month sentence, she moved to Oamaru, where she procured various trifling amounts of money, attempted to defraud a furniture vendor of a larger sum, and was in prison by January of the following year. On her release in October 1893, she moved to Oamaru at the invitation of a Salvation Army friend, where she sought to purchase a 6-roomed house and section in repayment for her friend's kindness, claiming to have received a substantial inheritance. She also borrowed various sums of money from another furniture seller after having advised him that she would be spending £75 on furnishings for the house. She now applied for a formal membership into the Salvation Army, but the local captain was aware of her history and said he would await proof if she had changed her lifestyle. After defrauding Salvation Army members out of 30 shillings for tickets to an event, she left Oamaru and headed to Palmerston. She was swiftly apprehended and in January 1894 again was imprisoned for 4 months with hard labour. This was her 8th prison sentence since 1886. By 1894 her reputation was becoming widely known, to the point that a public warning was written in the newspapers. Warning is given by our muscular contemporary of the presence in that district of a young woman named Maud Bock, whose achievements in the false pretences line occupied the attention of the police in Dunedin several years ago. She called the other evening at the house of Reverend Mr. McKerrow and stated that she was on her way to Fortrose and had lost her railway ticket. Assistance was given to her, but later suspicions were aroused and she was advised to depart. This she did. She is described as about 5 foot in height, dark complexion with dark brown hair and brown eyes. She has a small and not unprepossessing face and has short curly hair. She is a good conversationalist and is said to be very well educated. She is a splendid pianist and is altogether the last sort of young lady you would expect to be a most expert swindler. Another small mention of a crime, Maud Bock was arrested at Waikuati today for obtaining board and lodgings at Dunedin by means of false representation. In October 1895 she was imprisoned again for 3 months for not paying her board and lodgings. In 1897 in Oamaru, she was an accomplished pianist and her ability induced the local corps to hire a piano for the barracks. Those who knew her in Oamaru described her as a cultured, pleasant conversationalist. After serving this sentence, Amy appeared from official notices for several years. It was said that some of this time she spent at a Catholic-run Magdalene asylum for fallen women near Christchurch, but there's no records of her time there. In 1901, she began working as a housekeeper in Waimate under the name of Miss Sherwin, later leaving town and faking the death of Miss Sherwin in order to avoid the large debts she'd accumulated. In 1902, masquerading as Miss Mary Shannon in Christchurch, she befriended Alfred William Buxton, a well-known landscape gardener and nurseryman, and became a guest at his home. Through him, she met and defrauded investors of sums required to start a fictitious poultry farm in Mount Roskill, and was again imprisoned for 2 years with hard labour in March 1903. She'd certainly developed a reputation with the police by this stage as being curiously moral, in that she was known for giving away her ill-gotten gains, particularly to young female servants. And an article titled "My Friend Mr. Atkinson, New Version of Confidence Trick." A woman aged about 37 named Mary Shannon, alias Maud Bock, alias Lang, Bennett and Brunnell, pleaded guilty this morning before Dr. MacArthur SM to a most cleverly arranged and circumstantial fraud. The offences were the obtaining by false pretences from Ellen Pelham, wife of Thomas Pelham, cab proprietor of College Street, Wellington, of 2 sums of money, £25 and £10 on the 4th and 14th of February. Ellen Pelham deposed that 6 or 7 weeks ago the accused came on a Sunday with a friend of the witness to the witness's house, and they left again the next day for Auckland. While in the witness's house, the accused said she was going to Auckland to buy a poultry farm at Mount Roskill from a friend of hers, Mr. Atkinson. 8 days later, on the Tuesday, the accused again called on the witness. She said she'd been in Auckland and had seen the property at Mount Roskill. The witness believed the accused said it was everything she could desire. The accused also stated that close to the property she had seen another that would have been more suitable, but could not take it as she'd already made arrangements to take the first property. The second property was 7 acres, with a 4-roomed house, stable and shed, pens and necessaries for fowl breeding, including 3 incubators, and carried 1,000 fowls. The accused added that it could be purchased for £375 with £40 down and 10 shillings a week, and the accused suggested that the witness get it for her son. The witness said she would think about it. The next link in the chain was a circumstantial letter from Christchurch dated the 31st of January, in which the accused said she was leaving for Auckland on the 24th of February and that she was able to make Mrs. Pelham an offer because the owners of the property were keeping it open until the 11th of February, although others were after it, as a favour to her friend Mr. Atkinson. The property could be had for £345 cash, being a savings of £25 on the termed price of £370. The letter went on to say that the accused only had £320 in hand, and if Mrs. Pelham's son would supply the other £25, she would have the deeds made out in his name, and the money could be repaid to her at the rate of 5 shillings a week. Of course, Mrs. Pelham's son preferred the £370 arrangement, £40 down and 10 shillings weekly. Then no harm would be done. Mrs. Pelham deposed that she accepted this offer. She sent £25 to the accused in Christchurch by a post office order or registered letter. The accused telegraphed acknowledgement and subsequently wrote from Christchurch that she found that she was £10 short in the money required, that could she pay this and retain sufficient money for her passage to Auckland, and that if the witness could provide £10, she need not pay the 5 shillings instalment till she could manage. The letter contained a blank receipt which the witness requested to fill in, that is, to write in £35 if she decided to send the other £10, if not, to write £25. So Mrs. Pelham on the 14th of February sent Miss Shannon another £10. The accused not arriving in Wellington when expected, Mrs. Pelham telegraphed on the 18th of February, "When are you coming? Anxious." The accused sent a reassuring telegram in reply, and on arriving in Wellington sent Mrs. Pelham a message to say she was staying with friends in Karori and would on leaving them come and stay with Mrs. Pelham. This missive concluded the query, "Do you want yours or your son's name in the deed?" Mrs. Pelham did not see the accused until they met in the magistrate's court. Miss Shannon had been employing her spare time at Christchurch in obtaining, by false pretences, £15 of Mr. Ernest H. Little, and had been arrested in Wellington on this charge by Detective Bodham, who then charged her with the Wellington offences. She admitted them. The detective stated that when the accused was arrested, she was staying in a private hotel in Wellington and had £11, 11 shillings and 4 pence in her possession. The police had failed to discover any Mr. Atkinson. The accused was committed to the Supreme Court for sentence on the 2 Wellington charges. On the Christchurch charge, the amount being under £20, she was dealt with summarily, pleaded guilty, and was remanded for sentence till the Supreme Court passed sentence. At this time, the Evening Post published a lengthy article about her, headlined "Remarkable Female Swindler, Unique in Colonial Criminology," claiming that this woman stands supreme in cleverness over other female criminals, and in her own particular line, her position is probably unique. And an article titled "A Wellington Transaction." Amy once committed a very clever fraud for which she is accomplished in this very city of Wellington. She found that a certain young man, the only son of a widowed mother, was in a bank in a not very distant suburb. She also knew that a certain tradesman in a fairly large way of business was very friendly with the young man and his mother. This knowledge, combined with a little ingenuity and the ability to ride a horse at breakneck speed, served Amy admirably. One day the tradesman was surprised to see a lady ride up to the door of his place of business at a furious rate. She wanted to see him so particularly. Mrs. and it's left blank, son had been tampering with his books, and now his defalcations had been discovered. Unless he paid up at once, he would be arrested, and he had no money. Would Mr. Blank oblige Mrs. Blank by lending her £20 at once? Of course, Mr. Blank tumbled over everything in his shop, rushing after the £20. But that was not the end of it. An hour or two after, just long enough for an expert horseman on a fine mount to get to the suburb and back, the lady again drew rein at the shop door, her horse in a lather. Another £15 was wanted at once. She got the £15 and rode off. The benevolent tradesman then went to sympathise with the sorrowing mother and found that he'd been had. That case never came to the courts because the victim could not be persuaded to make a public confession for his trouble. In another case, she was travelling down to Dunedin some years ago, and on the boat she met a lady belonging to that city to whom she made herself agreeable. She had a way with her which always inspired confidence in her dupes. The lady was so charmed by a new acquaintance that she invited her to travel with the same railway carriage from Christchurch to Dunedin. Amy Bock, whose name at the time was probably Balfour or Chamberlain, or that of some other celebrity, was only too pleased to keep the lady company and continue to be agreeable. Natural than that she should be invited to stay a day or two at the ladies' Dunedin house. The invitation was accepted, of course, and all went well for a day or two until the lady proposed an outing for the family at Waitui. Bock had such a headache that she could not think of going out. But why should she not stop at home for the day, and then the servants could have a day off too? That was agreed to. The family left for Waitati, and the servants departed. Barely had the party time to leave the city when Amy Bock was off to a moneylender, and next to no time had raised a good round sum on the furniture. When the family returned, Amy had gone, but 3 months later, the financier called for his money. And another article, A Female Swindler, A Career of Crime in Wellington. A female swindler's remarkable career, which stands unique in the annals of colonial criminology, recently ended for the time being when she was passed within the wards of the Terrace Jail to serve a substantial sentence. Though still young in years, she's left a remarkable impression on the criminal records of the colony. The Post supplies these particulars of her career. Born in Victoria in 1861, she arrived here from that colony in 1884, nothing up to that date being known against her. She came of respectable, well-to-do parentage. She was educated, accomplished, had been a school teacher in Victoria, and wrote with a splendid hand, in fact 2 or 3 hands, all of which things were great factors in her criminal success. This young girl of 23 brought an amazing inventiveness into her line, which was confidence trickery, backed up sometimes with forgery. Her stories lacked nothing in plausibility, and she imported them into that wealth of natural detail for which Defoe is noted in his own particular branch of literature. This, however, was not altogether an advantage, as her work was so her own that the police could generally recognise it. Thus, as it is not uncommon with great artists, she sometimes suffered through her task being too well done. For the most part, she traded on the credulity of her own sex. Her youth, accomplishments, social gifts, and knowledge of the world were used to ingratiate herself with sympathetic and sometimes admiring sisters. No case is known of her using these gifts to gain her end by means of entering to an intrigue with a man. She understood both men and women, but the latter were of most use to her. The starting point was generally to become a lodger in a respectable boarding house, make friends with the proprietress and family and with all their friends. Some money having been wheedled from a member of the family, it was usually liquidated in presents to the friends and formed the basis of subsequent hauls from them. In fact, the money was mostly spent not on the adventuress herself, but with the evident object to keep the ball rolling, which indicates that profit was not a motive, but the crime was a mania and a disease. One of her recent victims, to the extent of over £30, was a lady friend, whose friend, also a lady, the adventuress had met in a boarding house in another city. Sometimes the proposition advanced by her to her victims was a splendid investment, for which the proposer would find the bulk of the money if the victim would find just a little. The just a little was generally forthcoming. In such a case, this wonderful woman would supply exact figures of capital and interest, terms of mortgage and repayments, and with as much minuteness of detail as a London financier, would display a rose-tinted prospectus. To bolster her position, she would write letters to herself as coming from 2 or 3 different people, each in a different hand. Once having courteously volunteered, she was left by a charmed family alone in charge of the house while the inmates were away on a holiday. The absence was brief, but long enough to allow her to have a moneylender in and raise a large sum on the furniture. Her masterpiece was a bold, imaginative feat. The reticence of victims for some time protected the female swindler in her career. Her first punishment was a short committal to Caversham Industrial School in 1885. One of her typical feats earned her a month's imprisonment in 1886, and she served various sentences up to 1895. Then came the committal to Mount Magdala, which was made at the instance of sympathetic ladies in Dunedin and was generally looked upon as a very temporary check to her criminal career. In the home she remained 5 years, and for nearly 2 years after she left it, nothing was known against her until this latest lapse. So the Magdala period really cuts this terrible career in two. She was a fatalist, regarding her failing as a disease. It is something to have kept good for 7 years, she was reported to have remarked, and what can you expect? It's in the blood. And there can be scarcely a doubt that this statement is absolutely true. So Amy Bock earned a reduction in her sentence for good behaviour and was freed in October 1904. She was admitted to the Samaritan home in Christchurch but left within 2 days. She found work at Rikea as Amy Chanel, but was charged in February 1905 with attempting to alter a cheque. Uncharacteristically, she denied committing this crime and pled not guilty, but was convicted by a jury and sentenced to 3 years. In Christchurch, Amy again appears in court. Amy Bock, for forging and uttering, was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment. She served 2.5 years of this and was released in 1907, where she took up residence at the Samaritan Home. She befriended members of the Pollards Lilliputian Opera Company at this time who were performing at the Theatre Royal, and travelled with them to Dunedin and committed a number of small frauds in order to present herself as patron of the company. So in January 1909, a warrant was issued for her arrest for obtaining money by false pretences, but Miss Bock succeeded in eluding the vigilance of the police until a few days ago. She was released on the 31st of May 1907 and for a year lived quietly in Christchurch. In 1908 she returned to Dunedin where, as Agnes Valence, she pawned her employer's furniture and went to ground after delaying pursuit by creating a complex scenario through letters from Miss Valence's concerned friend, Charlotte Skevington. It was at this point that she'd found the perfect disguise, posing as a wealthy sheep farmer, Percival Leonard Carroll Redwood. Percy holidayed at Port Molyneux on the South Otago coast, staying at the Albion House boarding establishment where he paid court to the landlady's daughter, Agnes Ottaway, and within a few weeks the couple were engaged. Bock managed to maintain the appearance of wealth by a succession of deceptions involving letters to lawyers, postal orders and small personal loans. These were not detected until after the elaborate wedding, which took place at the bride's home on the 21st of April 1909. 4 days later, Bock was arrested at the Ottoways boarding house. She was convicted in the Dunedin Supreme Court on the 27th of May on 2 counts of false pretences and 1 of forgery, and was finally declared a habitual criminal. And the articles detailing this amazing fraud: A Strange Woman from Dunedin. Amy Bock, alias Shannon, alias Valence, alias Skerrington, alias Percy Carroll Redmond, who was arrested masquerading in men's clothes, is spoken of by the members of the police force as one of the most peculiar criminals they've ever come across, as time and again she committed serious frauds for the fun of it. The proceeds of her depredation she's known to hand over to others, although she probably has risked a long term of imprisonment to amass the same. Her career is extended over 20 years, during which time she defrauded innumerable people. In many cases, the fraud was never traced definitely enough to justify prosecution, and in others, the people who were taken in would not willingly give evidence for fear of looking foolish. Her last performance of marrying Miss Ottaway, aged about 32, under the pretence of being a man, easily ellipses her previous list. And in April 1909, in the Waikato Argus, a real aristocrat. Amy Bock is about 40 years of age and is said by the police to be remarkably clever. She's of good appearance and talks remarkably well. Her tone of voice and wide knowledge always makes her victims, for the time, think that they have found a real aristocrat. She has been convicted many times in various parts of the Dominion. And on the 27th of April 1909 in the Queensland Brisbane Courier, masquerading as a man, girl marries a girl, wedding celebrated in great style. L.C. Redwood was arrested at Nugget Bay and brought to Balclutha. Redwood has been posing as a man, but turns out to be a woman named Amy Bock, who has been frequently before the courts on charges of false pretences. It is stated that Bock succeeded in winning the hand of the boarding house proprietor's daughter at Nugget Bay. The wedding was celebrated last week in great style. The masquerader posed as a nephew of Archbishop Redwood of Wellington. And another article in an extraordinary case reported from Otago, New Zealand. Some months ago, a woman named Amy Bock, who was wanted by the police on a charge of false pretences, disappeared from Dunedin. Nothing was heard of her until Saturday, when she was arrested at the Nuggets dressed in a man's attire, where she'd been passing by the name of Redwood. Thus disguised, the woman was actually married last week to the daughter of a hotel keeper at Nuggets. There were great local celebrations, and the Member of Parliament for the district attended the ceremony. And in the Broken Hill Barrier Miner in New South Wales on the 5th of May 1909. Masquerading as a man, Amy Bock's career, a notorious adventuress, details of a wedding. The New Zealand papers are full of the acts of Amy Bock, who recently was arrested on a charge of false pretences while masquerading as a man. She is accused of many swindles. In addition to her remarkable marriage with Miss Ottaway, it has now been discovered that prior to the wedding day, Amy visited Dunedin with her prospective bride and mother and purchased, on the strength of false pretences, jewellery to the value of £130. They then rode about in a cab. Altogether, the woman owes the cabman £30. When staying at Ottaway's boarding house as Percy Redwood, supposed nephew of Archbishop Redwood, Amy returned from an outing one day and told a pitiful tale of how she had an accident and had dropped into the sea £30 £1 notes. She said, "I owe you £60 and that is all the money I had." She wanted to employ a driver to get the supposed lost money, and a sympathetic lady boarder went to the savings bank and withdrew £41, which she lent to the imposter. The story of the wedding, which was told in great detail, shows that the bride's parents are old and well-known residents of Nuggets. There was a large gathering of friends and neighbours at the ceremony, which was conducted by Reverend Blaithwaite, an Anglican clergyman, assisted by Reverend Mr. Dalrymple, a Presbyterian clergyman. After describing the dresses of the bride and 10 bridesmaids, a local paper tells how the bride stood beside her betrothed to receive the ring. The wedding feast, it adds, was one to suit the palate of an epicure, and it was washed down with champagne. Reverend Dalrymple, in proposing the toast to the bride and bridegroom, said that they were all glad and welcomed Mr. Redwood, who came among them a stranger, but he was quite satisfied the union would be a happy one. Mr. Malcolm MP also spoke and gave good advice to the bridegroom. After the toast was drunk with musical honours, a letter was read from the bridegroom's mother, regretting that she could not be present because she herself was getting married at Auckland that day to a gentleman leaving for America to take up a position almost at once. The following morning, the parents of the bride and some intimate friends of the family held a conference, before which Redwood was summoned. He came jaunty, cool, self-possessed and confident to face them. The latter had heard a vague statement which had been current on the previous day that Redwood was not a man. Remembering his slight build, his delicate face and effeminate manners, and the fact that he was never observed to shave, people did not entirely discredit the rumour. Strangely enough, nothing seems to have been said at the family conference about the impostor's sex, but he was challenged in regard to his monetary resources. Redwood admitted temporary inconvenience in this respect and reiterated that his mother would make it all right when the time to meet his obligations came, which he said would be in a week. The following Saturday there was a complete exposure and Amy was arrested. And on the 11th of May 1909 in the Melbourne Argus, woman masquerader, her wedding presents sold, fancy prices realised. At Dunedin today, the wedding presents made in connection with the marriage of Amy Bock, who, masquerading as a man, married a young woman at Nuggets, is now awaiting her trial on a charge of false pretences, were offered for sale by auction. The sale attracted a great crowd and fancy prices were realised. And 3 days later in the Melbourne Argus, Miss Ottaway, who married Amy Bock whilst the latter was masquerading as Percy Redwood, has filed for a petition of annulment of the marriage. In part 4, I'll be covering in detail the trial related to the several charges that Amy Bock is now up for.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.